Nicole, how are you? It is so good to see you.
It's good to see you too. I'm okay.
Listen, I understand the feeling. We've got a lot on our plates right now, and I am just so grateful to be in conversation with you. Thanks so much for doing this. I'm going to jump right into it if that's okay.
Yeah.
So, we are in the midst of a some call it a celebration, some call it a commemoration, some call it something else altogether, but it is the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And I think all of us are reflecting on the history that we've been taught about that seminal document. And also the history that we're not taught, the history that we don't learn about our nation's founding. And of course, the 1619 Project, which is your baby that has delivered so much to all of us in terms of a new perspective on the founding of this country, is such a powerful example of recentering the formative role that Black people have played in the narrative of our nation's founding. So I just want to step back and ask you why you think it's so important to examine that narrative. What has, been mythologized about this country's founding, and what are some of the current tensions and conflicts about the origin of this country that applies to what we're all experiencing today? I know that's a lot, but I'm
I was
hoping
like,
we can
okay,
unpack that.
that's going to be the whole conversation.
That is the whole
Just trying to
conversation.
answer that one question. God, it's a big question. It's a hard question to answer right now because I would argue that our country right now is buckling under the weight of its myths. That we have sustained a lie about our founding for 250 years, and that lie has led us in so many ways to believe that we are infallible, that our democracy is secured because it's 250 years old, that we truly are this exceptional nation with a systems of checks and balances that will ultimately rescue us. So when I think about nearly everything that we commonly learn, and I'm clearly not talking about scholars. I'm not talking about people who spend a lot of time studying the history of the American Revolution, but everything that like our collective memory remembers about our founding is a myth, right? The idea that we were founded because these colonists wanted freedom. The idea that the nation that was birthed was the freest, most democratic nation and experiment with democracy that the world has ever seen. And what you and I both know is that this mythology necessarily must erase or diminish Black folks because we give lie to all of that. How do you explain our presence? How do you talk about the 1/5 of the population that was enslaved at the period of the revolution? How do we think about Thomas Jefferson drafting these words while owning more than 200 people, while sitting next to his enslaved, I say brother-in-law, though they got in-laws legally, right? But the brother of his wife's half sister, who was enslaved. So I've been, recently finished this book called The Nation That Never Was, and by the historian Kermit Roosevelt. And he really actually asked us to think differently about even how we say this nation was founded on great ideas, but just didn't live up to them. Well, he's actually arguing that when Thomas Jefferson writes, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that he actually wasn't talking about all men.
No.
But not even rhetorically speaking, that he was actually making a political argument about white men specifically. And so even when we're trying to evoke, it's like we all want to find something positive that we can cling on to about the founding, that even when we evoke those words, that wasn't what he intended, even if we're having an expansive view. So to me, because we've never been willing to tell the truth about our country, that is what has rendered us so vulnerable in this political moment. Because even very smart, very learned people kind of think in the end it's going to work out because this is America, right? And we have we had these divine founders, who created this infallible system, and we don't. And we're actually living, through the results of the poison pill that was built into the foundation of this country. And sorry if that was a bit rambling, but
Mm-mm, not at all.
I'm exhausted and angry, so I'm not as coherent
No,
as I'd
listen,
like to be sometimes. And especially thinking about the 250th, it's just so hard to even think about trying to celebrate this nation in this moment.
I agree. I am not in a mood for celebrating anything with respect to the history of this nation's founding for the very reasons that you just explained. And I do think that what you are pointing out about the mythology of what those words mean and what they hold is absolutely true. And it gives people comfort and makes people believe that, we truly were a nation that had these aspirations for everyone. And we've just taken a long time to get there. And this is really what we want and what we
That's
believe.
right.
And somehow there are these obstacles when that was never the case. You're right. The Declaration of Independence was a conversation between white men.
Yes.
It was a conversation between white men. And in fact, to the extent that they talked about other people at all, it was in the most dismissive and disparaging ways. They referred to Native Americans, indigenous
Savages.
people as savages,
Yes.
right? So we know that there was dehumanization baked in to the Declaration of Independence, like this document that had all of these lofty words and ideals. What I think is really fascinating is that, and I'll just speak for the Legal Defense Fund. I won't put this on you, but I'm going to ask this of you. What we have done is we've looked at some of these words and these projected ideals, and we've said, actually, we deserve those too. And we need
Yes.
to be included in that vision. And we've got a vision of our own that's even more expansive than what the so-called brilliant founding fathers were thinking of. But, when I think of the work of, people like Thurgood Marshall, who founded our organization, and so many others who have worked to force this country against its will to be something it never wanted to be, it's because we've had a much more expansive view of history. And so I want to take you back to your 1619 project, which, I think helped put that just, on blast, was such a showcase of how we've done that, how Black people have done that over time. And it's now been 7 years since the 1619 project was published. So in this context of this 250th anniversary, what's your relationship to the work today? Does it hit different? Does it feel like it has a different power in this moment?
God, it feels like a lifetime ago. Honestly, it's like, in some ways, this is the America that it's always been, but clearly in very substantial ways, it is a different country, than the country that we had when we birthed the 1619 project. I mean, just the sheer loss of rights and the ability to vindicate our rights, at breathtaking speed that we've seen under the second administration. But, it's the arguments hold true. And if anything, the society and what we're seeing in our society just confirms, that race has been the animating feature. Anti-blackness has been the animating feature of this country. It is the way that you can ascend politically. It is the way that you can get people to vote against their economic and material interests. Like we are seeing that so starkly played out. And it's just making me think, we know that the lives that we lead, the world that the LDF and Thurgood Marshall, the America that they helped force into existence, that was not the vision of our founders. You and I were never supposed to live the lives that we live. We were not, this multiracial democracy, right? They did not want a multiracial democracy. They did not want women to have access to power and the ability to shape politics and policy. And so in many ways, the America that was brought forth by Black people is a rejection of the founding. It is rejection of so I think if I were to write or edit the 1619 Project today, I would be leaning less into Black people perfecting those ideals and more into Black Americans helping to reject that founding and to actually refound a country actually based on ideals that we embrace now and multiracial democracy, of course, in the period of Reconstruction. And so while we've Black people have necessarily embraced this myth, but that's because Black people are pragmatic, right? Like we understand this country in a way I think almost no other group does. When you're brought here as property, when you are the one forcing the idea of equality into the Constitution, the idea of universal rights, into the law, this comes from Black Americans, then you do have to have some pragmatism about your politics. This is kind of, I think sometimes about, when Frederick Douglass originally was arguing that the Constitution was pro-slavery. And then he came to understand that wasn't a winning argument, right? He came to understand like the winning argument was actually to say, oh, the Constitution abhors slavery and you are a hypocrite, as opposed to saying the Constitution is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. And so I think we have always understood that. So we've embraced these ideas, even when we knew the men who wrote them didn't believe them to be true for us. Even when we knew that they were not written for us. We said, we see your words. And if you're going to say that, we're going to hold you to that. And if not, we're going to call out that hypocrisy. And that has always been our superpower. I would complicate even the complicated arguments of the 1619 Project and complicate that further. Because I was thinking a lot about this, Janae. This campaign of erasure that we're seeing, the Trump administration embark upon. And I know sometimes we tend to treat those things as superficial. So we understand like Supreme Court rulings and changes to law. We understand the impact of those, but we sometimes treat like this other erasure of history, of monuments, these renamings as superficial. And I'm like, they're not, because that is power telling you who is on top now. Who we are, what is the official policy of a country. And so when I was thinking about, for instance, the commemorative 1776 coins that were supposed to come out and how originally they were going to feature, Black women, they were going to feature white women, they were going to feature like different people who show how far America has come. And Trump says, no. We're only going to have white men and then one white woman with a white man on a coin who are pilgrims. And people were like, oh my God, that's not the America that our founders brought forth. And I was like, actually, that's a great representation.
Exactly that.
I'm like, now we can make an argument that we shouldn't commemorate that founding, but it's actually accurate. And I think because we have been unwilling to be just truthful about what these white men who broke off from the British Empire actually wanted, who they thought America should serve, then that means that when we see them doing it now, we don't recognize it. We think it's an aberration. As you know, this Supreme Court right now is not an aberration. For most of the history of the court, they have voted against minority rights, women's rights. And so what I think the 1619 Project was able to do, and this is what made it so dangerous, is pierce that myth, right? Make us actually see our country in a different way. And the funny thing is, of course, it's been called unpatriotic because we focus on many of the ugly parts of our history. But I always have argued it's only unpatriotic if you can't see Black people as fully American. Because if you tell the story of America through Black Americans, then it is that uplifting, maybe not uplifting,
But
right? But it is that
yeah.
narrative of equality, of freedom, of fighting for rights, of being willing to sacrifice for the expansion of rights for all people. But we can't see Black people as the heroes in the story. That somehow is diminishing to America, even though, of course, I argue no one is more American than we are.
Oh my God, there's so much
I
to
know I
unpack
just started
there.
talking about stuff that you didn't ask me, but hopefully somewhere in there is the answer to your question.
No, it is. It is. I'm going to follow a few of those threads because that was so rich. So one thing I want to just be really clear about, which you said so well, and that is that our erasure has always been an essential part of the equation for
Absolutely.
American glory, for the American story. We have
Yes.
always been the truth of our existence, the truth of our experience here has always been distorted, if not wholly erased. And that's
Yes.
part of how America is able to stand in the light that it does, because they don't tell the whole story. And that's why 1619 was such a groundbreaking intervention, disruptor. It was exactly what we need, and why it got so much heat, why it got so much vitriol and fire, because it actually pulled the veil off of that.
Hmm.
And I always say that our story is one of trials and triumph. You know,
Absolutely.
the American story is great because we've overcome some of the worst impulses of this country. And instead of celebrating that, instead of celebrating the people who forged that and who forced this country to rise above its worst inclinations, you know, we're told that we're being unpatriotic. And so
That's
this
right.
this bleeds into just the pervasiveness of anti-blackness, just how it is in our soil and in the DNA, in our structures, in our policies, in our monuments, everywhere around us. You may not even see it as such, but there is an anti-black narrative that is in the ether in terms of who we lionize, what we put in our curriculum, what we keep out, all of it. And that is not new. I mean, one of the things that we're focusing on in this episode is the role that race played in the struggle for independence from England, and specifically how leaders of that independence movement used racialized fears about rebellions of enslaved
Hmm.
people and massacres by indigenous people to unite the colonies. So there's always
Yes.
been that underlying, you know, criminalization of blackness and criminalization of people who are not white. And these tactics are very reminiscent of ways in which we see, you mentioned politicians earlier, getting people to vote against their material interests, their economic interests, their social interests across the board. And that's because there is this inherent belief of the subhuman nature, or I shouldn't say nature, of the subhuman identity that has been foisted upon Black people. And if we look at, you know, the rise of the super predator myth in the 1990s to the god awful rhetoric around immigrants and especially Black immigrants, you know, eating dogs and cats or coming from, you know, countries that have been defined as profane. So I want to explore a bit more your thoughts about using racialized fear as a tool of social control throughout American history, because one deeply unfortunate reality that the past general elections and what we're experiencing now has underscored for me is that we haven't learned from that at all. People are still being baited with these subliminal and sometimes very blatant, but with these very clear signals and messages about Black dehumanization.
Yeah. The thing about anti-blackness is it is so embedded in the DNA of this country that you don't even have to be taught it like explicitly. You just know. And the racial hierarchy, you just know. It is in the air that we breathe. Like no one has to sit you down and say, white people should have more. White people should live in nicer neighborhoods. White people should have the highest paying jobs. If I get on a plane, white people should be the ones in first class, right? Like no one has to tell you that. You observe it in society and you draw conclusions. And on top of that, you look who's ever been president, who's ever sat on the Supreme Court, who's running all the companies, who are the monuments to, who do we name streets after, right? So it is embedded. And because we don't learn about the history of race at our founding, how race was constructed, like people can say all the time, race is a social construct, but they don't actually know what that means. And they actually still believe that race is real, that we can see it. And so if you go all the way back to slavery, most of the labor in the early colonies was unfree labor. You had white indentured servants who were living through a brutal system of exploited labor. And then you had enslaved Africans. And what happens is they're all poor, exploited laborers living and working together. And they have a common identity, not based on race. They have a common identity based on class and struggle. And they get together in the Bacon's Rebellion and they rise up against the white landed elite. And the white landed elite learn a very powerful lesson from that. If we are to control the masses, we cannot allow this cross-racial or cross-continental at that time, because they didn't even have like concept of black and white quite yet, that we can't allow for this type of unity and collaboration. And so this is when they start to construct the ideology of whiteness. And what they do is they give those white indentured servants certain rights that just come by virtue of them being considered part of the white race. So they can never be enslaved. Their children will never be sold. Their children will be born free. Slavery becomes not just a condition, but one that is inherited, that you will never be free. They give land rights to indentured whites once they have finished their period of indenture. And so what that does is even poor white people who don't have, they're not living much better than any enslaved person, but they have a certain status that they get. It's not an economic status. It is a racial status. And they cling to that. And so they start to learn that if I'm white, there is a floor that I can't go below. And that my status, therefore, has to be built on being better than a black person, having more rights than a black person. And so that hierarchy becomes imprinted on the psyche of this country. And now we know that hierarchy is just normal, right? It is if I tell people this neighborhood is more likely to be poor because it's black, no one blinks an eye. Of course it is. If I tell people black students are the most likely to go to schools that don't have adequate resources, people are like, well, yeah, of course that's true. Not saying they agree with it. It's just not surprising, right? If I say black people are the most likely to be incarcerated, of course that's true. If I say we're most likely to die, of course that's true. Because the hierarchy is just natural to us now. It is normal to us now. And so not talking about that race and the creation of race was intentional in order to, for a small number of white landed men to hold power. Not talking about the reason that, these men, so of course, as we argue in the 1619 Project, the home of the American Revolution or the foundation of the American Revolution is not Boston. And it's not Philadelphia, it's Virginia, because these are all slaveholding white men from Virginia who are crafting our founding documents, who are crafting the ideas of republicanism. And the reason that they believe in representative government is because the masses of people are enslaved black people who will never engage in politics. So when we see a country now that is trying to gerrymander black people out of representational government right now, they are trying to normalize us back to the state that we were supposed to be. So, yes, the most contested argument in the 1619 Project was that some colonists joined the American Revolution for the preservation of slavery. Now, we make lots of arguments in the 1619 Project. There's a reason that that is the most contested, because we need to believe that the American Revolution was pure and that we were not founded as a slaveocracy. And yet, as I always tell people, the drafter of the Declaration was an enslaver from Virginia. The drafter, father of the Constitution, enslaver from Virginia. The Bill of Rights, written by an enslaver from Virginia. First president, enslaver from Virginia. 10 of the first 12 presidents, enslavers, almost all from Virginia. And now we are led to believe that slavery had nothing to do with the nation that they brought forth. So you have to deny the role of race, even as it is shaping everything about the society that they're building. And so as you said, Janae, there were two things. Yes, taxes. They definitely cared about taxes in the North. They wanted representation for white men in the North. That's true. But what they really wanted was the ability to keep encroaching on indigenous lands. And the British were tired of having to send troops to defend the colonies from these Indian wars, and said they weren't going to do it anymore. You cannot continue to expand on the land. And the colonists wanted to take more land. That's one of the complaints when you reference savages in the Declaration of Independence. He's like, you're leaving us vulnerable to these savages whose land we're trying to take. And the other people they mention, not by race specifically, are you're stoking insurrections against us. And those insurrections were slave insurrections, right? Black folks who were like, oh, y'all over here talking about freedom, we're going to get some of that too. You take up arms for your freedom, we're going to take up arms for our freedom. And so not learning that full and complete history, even the fact that when you have the president and his acolytes saying we're not a multiracial country, we've been multiracial since 1619. We have always been multiracial. And there's always been this effort for those who were excluded from the idea of who could be a citizen in America to press forth for that citizenship. So to me, the fact that we don't learn that history well, we don't question the hierarchy, then again, that's why we're so vulnerable to politicians understanding. And I know you know this history well, Janae, especially when you learn the history of the civil rights movement. Politicians who were unsuccessful always came back as racists, right? Yeah. So there was an understanding. I mean, you can look at George Wallace. He actually ran as a racial moderate. He got trounced and he said, I'll never be out-niggered again. And then he ran as a segregationist. You saw this with Faubus in Arkansas, who said, I'm going to comply with Brown v. Board. It became a political liability, so he became a rabid segregationist. We saw this with Richard Nixon. We saw this with Ronald Reagan. Now, I don't mean none of them held these beliefs, but they understood that if you become politically vulnerable in the United States, the way to stoke white voters is to play into the issue of racial polarization. And clearly, Donald Trump did so, right? White Americans are like all Americans right now, suffering economically, struggling to make ends meet, being forced into a gig economy, not having access to healthcare, not being able to own your homes. And instead of putting forth an economic policy, he knows all he has to say is, look at these black and brown people coming over here taking your jobs. Look at these black and brown folks in college when they don't deserve it and you can't even afford to go. So what that did is it then taps into this primal instinct in America where they're looking like, oh yeah, I do know this black person who has a better job than me. And that's not right. So even though I don't have anything and most black people don't have anything, I'm not going to focus on the people who are the real reason. It is the most easiest way to find success in American politics. And it goes all the way back to our founding with the same type of people, right? The white men who owned all the capital and who had all the land and all the power. It all leads back to that. And I think that is actually the danger of learning this history. The danger of learning this history is like taking the red pill in the Matrix. You suddenly see all the coding behind the society. You see who's actually responsible for how you live and why you suffer. And then you turn that understanding into policy and electoral choices. And so this administration had to try to stop people from learning this history and putting together and connecting the dots. And especially after the George Floyd protests, realizing that we're all suffering for this white supremacist founding, not just Black folks.
Mm-hmm.
All of us have less. All of our lives are harder. So the backlash was inevitable. And I think what's so frustrating is just that we fall for it every time. Like the inability to learn from the past, to be more discerning. We, as you know, this is the most, again, openly racist administration of our lifetime. Like we were born in the 70s. There have been racists, but not openly racist, in this way. And that he could be that openly racist and still win elections speaks to why confronting our history, acknowledging our history, and learning from our history is so important, but also why history is so dangerous in this moment. Sorry, that was a whole lecture. My bad.
No, listen, that was a perfect lecture. That's exactly what we're talking about when we're
Y'all will
talking.
edit this down. Sorry, y'all.
No apologies. I mean, we're talking about the political expediency of anti-blackness, right? It's
Yes,
the
it
shortcut.
works. It works.
It
Yes,
works. It's the easy route. And so, you talked about in that opening essay of the 1619 Project, Black people being the perfecters of this democracy. That actually takes work, right? It's a work that folks who want to use anti-blackness to coast, to convince people to not do the hard work of actually transitioning this country to live up to its ideals,
yes,
it's a shortcut. It's a shortcut.
yes.
And so when I think about the real founders of this democracy, that's why I don't use the term founding fathers, because they were not founding this for all of us. The
That's
real
right.
founders of this democracy that all of us are enjoying, white, Black, brown, Asian, LGBTQ plus, disabled, all of that, differently
Women,
abled people,
men,
all
yes,
men,
clearly.
all people are enjoying the benefits of a multiracial democracy that was founded by foot soldiers on the bridge of Selma in Alabama, by John Lewis, by Diane Nash, by Amelia Boynton, by Marie Foster, by the people who actually did the work of putting their lives on the line
Yes,
to create a document that finally brought everyone into the body politic. Wasn't perfect, hasn't been perfect in the 60 years since. We've all been fighting to get there, but they are the ones who actually created something through their own blood, sweat, tears, and sacrifice that truly founded the thing that we have always claimed to be, never were, and were the closest to being as a result of their work. And that's where we are now. And that is exactly what is in jeopardy. And
yes,
so, I love the story that you tell about your father being this patriotic person and having the flag outside your home, and the sort of quizzical feeling you had about, like, why are we celebrating this? And then
yes.
coming to appreciate why that was so important to him. And I've been using the term patriot so much more than I ever have
Mm,
before, because I do believe, without all the jingoism and the violence that often comes with that if we're talking about people who actually believe in the possibility of this country, if we believe in all the rhetoric and we believe in all the grandiose statements and have done the work, not just believe it, but have done the work to make that come to fruition, Black people are the supreme patriots of this country. And we have brought so many other people into that vision who are also doing incredible work. And that is really what gives me the hope that I'm holding on to about
mm.
the future of this country. I want to ask you something a little bit controversial, because, someone just posed this question to me. Considering all the divisions in this country, why aren't people who are progressive, or even Black people, just going off and creating their own state, creating their own communities, and separating from all of this pain, this extraction, this oppression that we're experiencing, in full force right now? And I had to remind them, we've done that, right? We had Greenwood, we had East St. Louis, we had Rosewood, we had, towns in Louisiana where we were thriving and we were living the American dream, right? And people could not leave us alone, right?
That's right.
That whole premise of white supremacy and hierarchy and nationalism could not allow us to exist separately and thrive because there had to be dominance. That seems to
Yeah.
define the American ideology. And so I wonder what you say to that as we continue to work to perfect this democracy and bring people along under a bigger tent. What is the viability of that vision?
It's over. Listen, one thing that, and we talk about this where I feel that like to be a civil rights lawyer, you have to have a level of optimism, right? You have to have a level of belief that change is possible. And I admire that. It's not me. It's not my nature. So one thing that I say all the time when I'm out speaking is there's just one truth for Black America, and that is that there will be a struggle. It's
100%.
just which one. But there is not a scenario in this country that we have as currently constituted where there is not a struggle. And you are absolutely right that, one of the, I think, greatest fallacies about the civil rights movement was that Black folks were just trying to get next to white people. That was never the case. What Black people always ever wanted, especially coming out of slavery, they had no desire to live and go to school with the people who had enslaved them. What they wanted was the ability to have their own land, create their own communities, and get their equal portion of resources that they were also paying tax dollars for. That was always the desire. And unfortunately, as you say, again and again, when we would create our own communities, when we would create our own schools, and North and South, by the way, like I know we like to think it's just a problem of the backward South or the former Confederacy. There was no place in America where Black people could truly be free. There was no place in America where our ascension or white people seeing us trying to educate ourselves or seeing us have some financial success was not seen as a threat to the hierarchy. And to this day, our success is seen as directly corresponding to their diminishment. So, when I was reporting and working on my never yet published, because I never finished it, book on school segregation, there's stories in Connecticut of Black communities building schools and white people in Connecticut burning the schools down.
Yes.
These were private schools, privately funded, but the idea that Black people were getting an education was so offensive because that meant Black people were trying to be our equals. And we cannot allow that because the natural space for Black people is subservience, right? So when we think about this idea, and I actually just did an interview yesterday, ever since I was a child, I was vexed by this idea of like, why did Black people not leave after slavery? Right? You had these colonization societies. You had white people. I mean, Abraham Lincoln was willing to like subsidize us to get on ships and leave this country. And I never understood why we didn't. Like, why would you stay in the country that enslaved you, that sold your children, that allowed you to be raped and murdered, that didn't treat you as a human being? And the answer was, and this was what part of like researching on the 1619 Project, I finally understood. Now, I still don't know if I agree, but I understood. The answer was like, this is our country. We have no other country to go to, right? You stripped us of our knowledge of our people that we came from, our languages, our names. You stripped us of all that. So we are American. We built this. And people like Frederick Douglass, who, or Martin Delany, who said our ancestors' blood is in this soil. Their bones are in this soil. Every war this nation has fought, we have fought in. We have built the infrastructure. We are what made this nascent nation one of the most powerful and wealthy nations in the world, both with our stolen labor, but also our intellect, our cultural output. And now at the moment of our freedom, you're going to tell us to leave it to you? Like you have to respect the moxie and like the like, hell no, we're not going to be forced out of the thing we built. And I think that's just true today. Like the answer is, I thought you were going to ask me because I know a lot of, well-off Black folks who are considering leaving America. And my answer is, our fight is with our people.
Yes.
Our fight is with our folks. Most of our people cannot, even if they wanted to. Most people in my family could not, even if they wanted to, pick up and leave this country. But what that means then is that we are going to have an enduring struggle, right? Coretta Scott King said, the fight for democracy must be won and fought in every generation. And we are in not just the fight of our generation, the fight of our lives, right? So the answer, every time people think they've come up with like the new solution, like, why don't we just start our own communities? I'm like, just read history, y'all. Just read history. Everything you think we haven't done, we have tried. And the truth is, every time we tried to do it, it's been destroyed. Now, I still think we should try. And frankly, I think much of the response to what's happening now, I'm like, you don't want us in your institutions? Okay. Let's build our own. Let's support our own. Let's support what already exists. Let's build our own infrastructure and support our own infrastructure. I agree with that. But I also understand we are a 13% minority in this country. And we don't have the ability to just disconnect and be left alone. We don't have the ability to disengage from politics because politics is engaging with us, whether or not we do. We just have to understand. And once I'm realistic with myself, I can deal with whatever it is, right? This is what I tell my husband. Don't tell me you're 15 minutes away if you haven't left home.
Exactly.
If you just prepare me for what I have to face, the reality, I can deal with it. If I know it's going to be an hour, I know it's going to be an hour. But if you tell me in 15 minutes, I'm be agitated. It's going to be a problem. It's the same thing for me. I'm like, I know there's going to be a struggle. Doesn't feel good. I wish it wasn't that way. But if we understand that, then we can prepare ourselves mentally, spiritually, physically for the fight ahead. But we can't do it by deluding ourselves and thinking there's just some magic solution that all of our ancestors never thought of. Trust me, every solution that we're going to think of, they've already thought of. And in fact, our lives are the product, right, of all the ways that they found to fight against the innate nature of this nation. And we should look to that ancestral knowledge and not dismiss it.
Listen, I couldn't agree more. And as I bring us to a close, what I will say on that, to build on that analogy, the one thing that I think we need to accept is that as long as we are on the soil of this country, we will be fighting. We will be fighting against the inertia, against its origin story, against the anti-blackness that animates this entire structure. We will change it. We will evolve it. We will continue to perfect it. We will continue to force it against its will, but that will always be a fight. And
right.
that accepting that and understanding that is a freedom in and of itself, because it just tells you there should be no holds barred, that this is the work of being a Black person in America, of being someone who believes in justice and freedom and equality, of being a true ally to that work. That is the assignment. It is not one that has a conclusion. It is ongoing. And that, frankly, is what I think gives me the inspiration and the hope that you say resides with civil rights lawyers, but I think back also to the profound words of Frederick Douglass. And for those who have never read his seminal speech, What to the Slave is the 4th of July, that is required homework. If you even want to say a word about this 250th anniversary,
right?
read his speech. It is a biting and piercing commentary about American democracy, but it opens and it closes with an overwhelming sense of optimism. And this is a man, who came from slavery and rose to become one of the most photographed people in the history of the world, not just this country. Someone who had such an imprint on who we are and who inspired so many other struggles. And what he said at the end of that speech was, notwithstanding the dark picture I have presented of the state of the nation, I do not despair this country. Therefore, I leave off where I began, with hope. And so despite the dark picture we may have painted today, because of the work that you've done in the 1619 Project and the eyes that it has opened and the illumination that it has created and what it has sparked in a whole new generation of freedom fighters, I leave with a sense of hope because of the outstanding work that the staff at the Legal Defense Fund has been doing over the course of 86 years and is still not backing down, even in the face of losses, even in the face of headwinds and head fakes. We are still doing the work. And in many places, we are winning. That's what gives me a sense of hope. And, we are thinking about the 250th anniversary through the frame of reckoning, reimagining, and refounding. And so if there's a final word you want to say about that framing, reckoning, reimagining, or refounding, I know we would all love to hear it.
Oh, thank you. And you know what? Thank you. Frederick Douglass is my favorite American. I think he was the greatest American this country has ever produced it and a true founder. And he wrote that speech, of course, while 4 million Black Americans were still enslaved in this country. I think it's a great reminder that we come from a people who had to believe that the impossible could be made manifest. Like we are the products. There's no reason Frederick Douglass should have logically believed that slavery could end in his lifetime. And yet it did. Mm-hmm. There's no reason that Fannie Lou Hamer and Diane Nash and Joanne Bland could have believed that they could topple racial apartheid in America in their lifetime, yet they did. So I think, it is, while I'm not a hopeful person, I am the product.
Am I winning
I am the product of hopeful people, right? And I know that as dark as these days are, that change is possible and that we will choose. Ultimately, we have the power to decide what country we are. And I do think that last word, refounding, that as we contemplate this 250th year, as we see our society seeming to break down and destruct in every way possible, we should remind ourselves, right, that all of the great strides in this country have been born of revolutionary times. They have been born of destruction, because what destruction allows you to do is build something completely new. So I hope that after the pain that we are going to go through and that we should be real about, that we take this as an opportunity to refound again, and that we listen finally to Black people who have always had the most expansive view of democracy and community, and that we will be the ones to help chart the path to this new thing if we choose it.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Thank you for that inspiration.
It's always great talking to you. And let me just say, thank you for the work. I know, sister, how tough these days are for you. But I'm grateful that you're there, and I'm grateful for the entire LDF staff. Just know your people hold you and are just thankful. And thank you all as well.
Thank you, Nicole. Appreciate it.
Resonate.